Welcome to Earthenkind Quests. My name is Mike, and this video shares about what might happen when an Eldritch Knight fighter battles against a Draconic Sorcerer and an Ogre. The two characters are at level 8. The encounter follows the rules of the 2024 Player's Handbook in Dungeons & Dragons. The Ogre is an ally of the Sorcerer, and it is a challenge rating 2 creature in the 2025 Monster Manual. At first glance, this battle seems unbalanced and unfair, with the Eldritch Knight fighting against 2 opponents. This part is intentional as a way to experiment and learn about what could happen in this situation. In the video text description, you can see the web links for the level 8 character sheets in D&D Beyond. As with all of the videos in this series of Nemesis battles, the characters are not necessarily optimal as combatants. Rather, they represent the kinds of characters that I expect to meet in a campaign starting at level 1 and then making choices up through level 8. The Wood Elf Eldritch Knight fighter is named Eldritch. She is a dexterity-based melee combatant. She relies on her fast movement, limited spellcasting mostly for defensive purposes, and a combination of her fighter weapon masteries and combat-oriented feats. Specifically in this battle against a sorcerer, the Eldritch Knight probably can benefit from her Maid Slayer feat. The human Draconic Sorcerer is named Sebastian Drake. He can choose among many damage-dealing spells. During most battles, the sorcerer uses meta magic for quickening a spell as a bonus action. His elemental affinity with fire grants resistance to fire damage and a small bonus of damage with fire spells. The Ogre in this battle acts as an ally of the Sorcerer. As a challenge rating 2 creature, the Ogre adds more power and threat level in combination with the Sorcerer. As a team, the Sorcerer and the Ogre together can absorb a greater amount of total hit points of damage, perform more actions per round, and potentially produce more damage per round. Leading up to this point, the Eldritch Knight Eldritch has been living in the forest realm of her Wood Elf ancestors. Previously, she had been away for some years. The Eldritch Knight was part of a team of heroes on a quest to defeat a fire-breathing red dragon. Eldritch and her companions faced the 4 enforcers of the dragon, and in time they defeated the dragon in its volcano lair. Today in the forest, Eldritch happens to see one of those former enforcers of the Red Dragon walking along a path through the forest. She sees the Draconic Sorcerer, Sebastian Drake. The other day, she heard a rumor that the sorcerer was causing trouble at the Spellsword Academy, seeking revenge against the current leader and teacher at the academy, the Bladesinger wizard Salamunglo, and engaging in a duel against the Bladesinger's latest 2 students at the academy. Eldritch remembers her old rivalry with the Bladesinger Salamunglo, and how later they worked together with the team of heroes fighting against the Red Dragon's 4 enforcers and eventually against the dragon itself. Eldritch immediately is suspicious about what the Draconic Sorcerer could be doing here. She knows that the path leads through the forest, over the adjacent hills, and eventually toward the edge of the remote desert. What could the sorcerer be planning? Could he be collaborating with the other former enforcers of the Red Dragon? A few days ago, the Draconic Sorcerer Sebastian Drake failed in his duel against the 2 students at the Spellsword Academy. He escaped, and he started to travel along a path that eventually will lead him into the remote desert. Along his way, the sorcerer knew that the 2 students were following him from the Spellsword Academy. He recruited 2 other adventurers to set an ambush while he continued on his journey. Today, the sorcerer walks along a path through the forest and he meets an ogre. Sebastian Drake convinces the ogre to accompany him during his travel as a precaution in case of needing extra muscle along the way. The Eldritch Knight fighter, Eldritch, is nearly 300 feet away from the sorcerer and the ogre. She cannot see or hear clearly about what is happening. She uses her once-per-day free casting of 2 spells as a Wood Elf without using spell slots. She casts Pass Without Trace, adding a +10 bonus to her stealth rolls. She casts Long Strider, adding 10 feet to her movement. She prepares her 2 weapons, holding her scimitar in one hand and her short sword in another hand. With caution, Eldritch approaches the scene where the sorcerer is talking with the ogre. She moves with stealth through the forest cover. She rolls for a stealth skill check. A result of 31 by far exceeds the passive perception of both the sorcerer at 10 and the ogre at 8. The Eldritch Knight remains undetected while she approaches within about 50 feet. Even if the sorcerer and the ogre would roll active perception checks, then they cannot roll high enough to detect the Eldritch Knight right now, unless the Eldritch Knight might do something to reveal herself. The sorcerer and the ogre speak in the giant language. Eldritch does not know this language. She cannot comprehend the content of the conversation. She can attempt to evaluate the general mood and context, informed somewhat by her prior knowledge about the sorcerer. She rolls an insight check. A result of 9 does not reveal anything in particular beyond what the Eldritch Knight already suspects about the sorcerer probably plotting about something. At this point, Eldritch decides that she needs to stop whatever the sorcerer might be planning. She wants to act now before anything else could develop with more dangerous potential. Eldritch anticipates that the sorcerer most likely will use magical flight and teleportation to control the range of a battle. In this case, the Eldritch Knight plans to use her 2 melee weapons at first, yet she is prepared to stow away those weapons if needed for switching to a mode of ranged combat. From a distance of 50 feet away, Eldritch moves out from her hidden position to attack. The participants roll for initiative. The Eldritch Knight rolls 17. The sorcerer and the ogre are surprised and they roll with disadvantage, resulting in 11 for the sorcerer and 3 for the ogre. In round 1, the Eldritch Knight Eldritch begins with a bonus action to cast Jump on herself, gaining extra mobility. Eldritch moves directly to the Draconic Sorcerer, and she begins with her weapon attacks, starting with her scimitar. An attack roll of 25 hits the sorcerer. A shield spell cannot block this attack. The scimitar brings 8 slashing damage. As part of this attack, the Eldritch Knight stows away her scimitar. The Nick weapon mastery allows an extra attack with a light weapon in another hand. With a short sword, the Nick attack of 14 misses against the sorcerer's armor class of 16. The formal extra attack with the short sword scores a solid hit. It inflicts 9 piercing damage. The Vex weapon mastery grants advantage on the Eldritch Knight's next attack against the sorcerer. Before the sorcerer can fly or teleport away, the Eldritch Knight uses her action surge, gaining another 2 attacks. With the Vex advantage, the short sword scores a critical hit. The sorcerer suffers 12 piercing damage. The Vex weapon mastery continues. Again with the short sword, another Vex advantage attack of 26 hits the sorcerer. It inflicts 11 piercing damage. The Vex weapon mastery applies again. Eldritch continues to hold her short sword in one hand. She aims the tip of the weapon at her opponent while encouraging for the sorcerer to surrender now and be spared. The Draconic Sorcerer, Sebastian Drake, smirks at the Eldritch Knight. As a bonus action, he quickens a spell. He considers about casting Thunder Step to cause damage to his opponent while teleporting 90 feet away. However, he decides instead to cast Fly on himself, gaining a flying speed of 60 feet. The sorcerer uses his action to disengage, thereby avoiding opportunity attacks. With the fly spell, he moves upward 60 feet. Sebastian Drake proclaims that now he controls the battlefield. In his perspective, the Eldritch Knight is the one who should surrender. The ogre moves into melee contact with the Eldritch Knight, lunging forward with his great club. An attack roll of 14 misses against the armor class of 17. At the end of round 1, the Draconic Sorcerer Sebastian Drake has sustained substantial damage. Nonetheless, he feels confident that he can outlast the Eldritch Knight by flying at a distance. With help from the ogre, the sorcerer can wear down the Eldritch Knight's hit points. In round 2, the Eldritch Knight Eldritch uses her interaction with an object to stow away her short sword. With the jump spell, she jumps upward 30 feet, costing only 10 feet of her movement. While exiting the reach of the ogre, however, she provokes an opportunity attack. Rolling with disadvantage due to the Eldritch Knight's speedy feat, the ogre's attack roll of 10 misses the target. At the peak of the jump, Eldritch uses her reaction to cast Featherfall on herself, thereby slowing her fall back down to the ground. As part of an attack action, the Eldritch Knight draws out her sling, and she uses her free hand to prepare the ammunition of sling bullets. With the effects of the Featherfall spell, she attempts 2 ranged attacks at the sorcerer. The first sling attack rolls with advantage due to the previous Vex weapon mastery, however an attack roll of 10 misses. A second sling attack roll of 27 hits against the sorcerer's armor class of 16. The sling bullet causes the maximum 9 bludgeoning damage, and it applies the slow weapon mastery. The sorcerer loses 10 feet of movement. With the damage, the sorcerer must attempt a Constitution saving throw in order to maintain concentration on the fly spell. The sorcerer usually would roll with advantage due to his Warcaster feat, but the advantage is cancelled by the Eldritch Knight applying her Mage's Slayer feat. The saving throw succeeds. The fly spell continues. After returning safely back down to the ground, the Eldritch Knight uses her bonus action of her Second Wind feature. She retains all of her hit points at this time, so the Second Wind will not provide any healing benefit. The Tactical Shift option immediately allows to move half of the fighter's speed without opportunity attacks. Eldritch uses this extra movement plus her remaining movement to reposition herself about 70 feet away. Here she drops prone. While she will be in the prone condition, any attacks within 5 feet will be with advantage against her, but any attacks from a distance will be with disadvantage. The Draconic Sorcerer, Sebastian Drake, flies at 60 feet above the ground. He cackles into the wind. He uses a bonus action to start his innate sorcery feature, adding a bonus of +1 to the difficulty class of his spellcasting saving throws and gaining advantage on his spell attack rolls. As his action, the sorcerer at first wants to upcast Scorching Ray with a 4th level spell slot that could send 5 rays of fire at the Eldritch Knight. However, he knows that the innate sorcery advantage of the attack rolls would be cancelled by the Eldritch Knight's prone condition. In this case, the sorcerer upcasts Fireball with a 4th level spell slot, engulfing the Eldritch Knight. The Fireball produces 39 points of damage, including the sorcerer's elemental affinity bonus. The Eldritch Knight succeeds with her dexterity saving throw, and she sustains only half of the damage, reduced down to 19 fire damage. She already used her reaction with her Featherfall spell earlier, so she cannot cast Absorb Elements for additional damage reduction. Eldritch rolls a Constitution saving throw to maintain concentration on her Pass Without Trace spell. A result of 15 succeeds. Sebastian Drake grumbles to himself. He flies another 50 feet higher into the air. He cannot move the full 60 feet of his fly spell due to the slow weapon mastery of the sling attack. The sorcerer now reaches up to 110 feet above the ground. The Ogre moves 40 feet closer to the Eldritch Knight, still at a distance of 30 feet. Instead of using a dash action to move into melee contact, the Ogre throws a javelin. A disadvantage attack roll of 11 misses the prone target. At the end of round 2, the Draconic Sorcerer considers about a possible escape plan. The Eldritch Knight has been lucky with the dice rolls. The next rounds of the combat could be different. In round 3, the Eldritch Knight Eldritch uses her interaction with an object to stow away her sling. She uses half of her movement to stand up from the prone condition. As a bonus action, the Eldritch Knight uses her Second Wind feature, this time to regain 15 hit points, as well as to apply the Tactical Shift option immediately to move half of her speed. The Eldritch Knight uses some of her remaining movement to enter into melee contact with the Ogre. As part of the attack action, Eldritch equips herself with a short sword, and she attempts to stab at the Ogre. An attack roll of 19 hits the target. The short sword produces 11 piercing damage, and it applies the Vex weapon mastery. At this time, Eldritch does not attack the Ogre again. Rather, she steps away. The Ogre attempts an attack of opportunity with disadvantage due to the Eldritch Knight's speedy feat. A result of 11 misses the target. Eldritch uses her remaining movement combined with the jump spell to return back to her previous location at the start of her last turn during round 2 of this battle. She looks upward at the flying sorcerer within the range of 120 feet to cast the cantrip Firebolt. The Eldritch Knight's War Magic feature allows to cast 1 cantrip instead of 1 attack of the attack action. With the attack roll of 14, the sorcerer manages to avoid a potentially fatal blow. The Draconic Sorcerer, Sebastian Drake, curses at the Eldritch Knight. He summons draconic fiery power into himself. As a bonus action, he uses Meta Magic to quicken the spell Scorching Ray, upcast with the 4th level spell slot, sending 5 blasts of fire at his opponent. All of the attacks are with advantage due to the innate sorcery feature. The first ray misses. The second ray hits, triggering the Eldritch Knight's reaction to cast Absorb Elements. The third ray hits. The fourth ray hits. The fifth ray scores a critical hit. The total damage, including the critical hit and the sorcerer's elemental affinity bonus, amounts to 36 fire damage, reduced by half with the Absorb Elements defense down to 18 damage. Eldritch needs to attempt 4 Constitution saving throws if she wants to maintain concentration on her Pass Without Trace spell. All 4 of the attempts are successful. The lowest is 10, and the highest is 24. As his action, the sorcerer uses his once-per-day free casting of Guiding Bolt without using a spell slot. The advantage attack roll of 16 misses against the armor class of 17. The sorcerer howls at his accursed bad luck. He flies 60 feet sideways, preparing for a possible escape during the next round of combat. He shouts in the giant language, encouraging the ogre to strike down the Eldritch Knight. The ogre strides toward the Eldritch Knight, swinging the great club and bringing it down with an attack roll of 21. The attack brings 16 bludgeoning damage. The Eldritch Knight could not avoid this attack with her shield spell because she already used her reaction with casting Absorb Elements. At the end of round 3, the sorcerer recognizes that he might be able to wear down the Eldritch Knight as long as the ogre can bring more damage into this combat. The dice rolls so far, though, mostly have been lucky for the Eldritch Knight and unlucky for the sorcerer and the ogre. In round 4, the Eldritch Knight Eldritch uses her bonus action with her second wind feature. She regains 12 hit points. The sorcerer is outside the range of her most effective attack options. In this case, she focuses her attention on the ogre with a flurry of weapon attacks. As part of the attack, Eldritch equips her scimitar. With the Vex advantage, the scimitar hits the target. It delivers 8 piercing damage. The prior Absorb Element spell releases a bonus of 3 points of fire damage. The Nick Weapon Mastery provides an extra attack applied with the short sword. The attack roll of 12 is high enough to hit the ogre's armor class of 11. It inflicts 9 piercing damage, and it applies the Vex Weapon Mastery. With the Vex advantage, the short sword strikes into the ogre once again. The attack generates another 11 piercing damage. The Vex Weapon Mastery continues. The ogre suddenly is in the bloodied condition with half or fewer of its hit points. Eldritch cannot speak in a language that the ogre understands, but she attempts to intimidate the ogre into running away. With her grumbling voice and fierce posture, she rolls for an intimidation skill check. With a result of 18, the ogre begins to be influenced, but it remains in the fight for now. The Draconic Sorcerer, Sebastian Drake, flies back toward the battle, still at a height of 110 feet above the ground. He tells himself that the luck of this encounter is overdue to shift into his hands. As a bonus action, the sorcerer uses metamagic to quicken a firepall, engulfing the Eldritch Knight once again. The ogre stands just outside the blast radius. The Eldritch Knight succeeds with the dexterity saving throw and uses her reaction to cast Absorb Elements. The 35 points of fire damage are reduced by half, twice, down to only 8 points of damage. With a Constitution saving throw, Eldritch maintains concentration on her Pass Without Trace spell. Sebastian Drake uses his action to cast Sorceress Burst. With the advantage roll of innate sorcery, the attack hits. However, the Eldritch Knight's Absorb Elements reduces the 10 points of fire damage by half, down to only 5 points. Once again, the Eldritch Knight maintains concentration on her Pass Without Trace spell. Sebastian Drake shouts out in the giant language, urging the ogre to stay in the fight while victory is within reach. With a persuasion check of 22, the sorcerer convinces the ogre to persevere, effectively negating the previous intimidation by the Eldritch Knight. The ogre roars and brings down his great club to attack the Eldritch Knight. However, a disappointing attack roll of 12 misses the target. At the end of round 4, the Eldritch Knight's defenses are beginning to wear down. She has been fortunate so far to avoid nearly all of the ogre's attacks, as well as to avoid or minimize the damage from the sorcerer. Currently, though, none of these combatants will be able to sustain for much longer. The sorcerer is especially vulnerable in this moment. In round 5, the Eldritch Knight Eldritch continues to attack the Ogre. With the Vex advantage, the scimitar slashes into the Ogre. The strike produces 10 piercing damage. The Absorb Element spell adds 4 points of fire damage. The scimitar's nick attack comes with the short sword. The attack hits. It brings 9 piercing damage. The Vex weapon mastery will apply on the next attack roll against the Ogre. One more advantaged attack with the short sword almost certainly will defeat the Ogre. Nonetheless, Eldritch steps away. The Ogre attempts an attack of opportunity with the Great Club, rolling with disadvantage due to the Eldritch Knight's speedy feat. The attack misses the target. Eldritch steps just outside the reach of where the Ogre could impose disadvantage on a ranged attack roll with her Firebolt cantrip. She aims at the Flying Sorcerer, near the maximum range of 120 feet of the Firebolt. The attack roll 22 hits. The result is too high to be blocked by a shield spell. The Firebolt causes 14 fire damage, reduced by half with the Draconic Sorcerer's resistance to fire damage. Now with only 2 hit points remaining, the Sorcerer rolls a Constitution saving throw to maintain concentration on his Fly spell. A result of 8 is a failure. Filled with panic, the Sorcerer curses at himself for not preparing a contingency such as the Featherfall spell. Without the Fly spell, the Sorcerer falls 110 feet. When he hits the ground, then he suffers 40 points of bludgeoning damage. He falls unconscious. Eldritch attempts once more to intimidate the Ogre into fleeing from this battle. An intimidation skill check of 7 does not influence the Ogre. The Eldritch Knight uses her jump spell and her remaining movement to gain as much distance as possible from the Ogre. Once again, she falls into the prone condition. While unconscious, the Sorcerer attempts his first death saving throw. A result of 11 succeeds. The Ogre stomps toward the Eldritch Knight. Once again, the Ogre decides against using the dash action to enter into melee combat. Instead, the Ogre throws a javelin with disadvantage against the prone target. The disadvantage attack roll of 20 would be enough to hit, but the Eldritch Knight uses a 2nd level spell slot to cast Shield, raising her armor class up to 22. At the end of round 5, the Eldritch Knight knows that victory is close. The Ogre appears to be at the edge of being defeated. The Sorcerer is unconscious on the ground. The Eldritch Knight considers how to bring the battle into a conclusion while still being able to learn what the Sorcerer has been plotting. In round 6, the Eldritch Knight Eldritch uses half of her movement to stand up from the prone condition. With her remaining movement and the jump spell, she enters into melee contact with the Ogre. With the Vex advantage, the scimitar strikes at the Ogre, aiming for a non-lethal blow. The advantage attack hits. It causes 10 points of non-lethal damage. The Ogre falls unconscious. The Eldritch Knight fighter, Eldritch, has won this Nemesis battle. She uses ropes and nearby foliage to secure the Ogre. She applies similar restraints on the Sorcerer. She stabilizes both of her prisoners, and she contemplates what to do next. The Eldritch Knight wonders if the Draconic Sorcerer could be collaborating with other of the former enforcers of the Red Dragon. In this case, perhaps other of the Eldritch Knight's former companions might be in danger, especially when considering the rumor about how the Draconic Sorcerer had been causing trouble for the Blazinger wizard Sailor Moonglow and her 2 students at the Spellsword Academy. In general terms, Eldritch knows that the path here leads through the forest, over the hills, and out to the edge of the remote desert. The specific plans of the Sorcerer, however, remain mysterious for now. The Eldritch Knight will need to remain vigilant and alert. Our story will continue in the next episodes of Nemesis Battles. For now, in the comment section, please share your ideas and suggestions about what could have happened differently and what could happen next. As always, thank you for watching. I will see you in the next video.